Hello class. Today we're going to factor quadratic expressions in the form of x squared plus bx plus c. That expression can sometimes be factored into two binomials in the form of x plus r times x plus s, where r and s are two numbers that have a product of c and a sum of b. So what I mean by that is that the two numbers will multiply together to give us c. So they multiply to c. And they add to b. So b is the number in front of bx squared. So we're going to do our first question. We're going to factor x squared plus 7x plus 12. Remember from the last lesson before March break, or you may have watched some of the review lessons on common factoring, that to factor means to take an expression, which is a sum or difference of terms, and write as a product. So in the questions today, when we write as a product, we're going to end up with a binomial times a binomial. Now, I wrote down in this area here a little summary to help you along. So when we're factoring these trinomials, use a factor sum chart to help brainstorm different values of r and s. So remember, r and s are the numbers that go in these two positions here that are factors of c. What that means is they are two numbers that multiply to give you the number c, and at the same time they will add up to b. Once you find those numbers, write them in the r and s positions in the brackets. So again, they're going to go in this position and this position. Okay, so let's go through this first example. So we're going to start with this first step. I'll just write down step 1. We're going to make a factor sum chart. This helps us brainstorm, and I strongly encourage you to do this when you don't recognize the numbers right away. So we're looking for factors of 12, because that's c. So remember, that's c. That's sum to b, which would be 7. Okay, so there's b and that's c. Okay, so for example, you're thinking about numbers that multiply to 12. So let's say you try 6 and 2, because you know that 6 times 2 is 12. Now let's test it. 6 plus 2 equals 8. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the sum to be 7. So we're brainstorming. We try 12 times 1. 12 plus 1 is 13. That's also not what we want. So now we keep thinking and we're like, oh, 3 times 4 is also 12. And when I add 3 and 4 together, I do get the 7. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so this is correct. So once we have the correct one, we know r and s. So therefore, r equals 3 and s equals 4, or vice versa. So now we're on to step 2. Step 2, we're going to draw our two brackets. We know from this pattern that it's going to factor to x plus r times x plus s. So I'm going to put the x down in that position. And then I'm going to say that r is 3 and s is 4. You could also say that s is 3 and r is 4. That would be fine. So because 3 is a positive number, I write down positive 3. And s is also a positive number in this example, so I write down positive 4, and now it's factored. Now, excuse me, the one thing we can do when we're doing these questions, we could check our answer. So we're gonna check by expanding. When I do the distributive property twice to check, x times x gives me x squared, x times 4 is 4x, 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times 4 is 12. And now I'm going to add like terms. I have x squared plus 7x plus 12, which is the question, so I know I've done it correctly. Okay, I'm just going to add here that this here was step 2 for you. So step 1, you make the chart. Step 2, you just take these numbers and you put them in these two positions. Let's do the next one. So now we're going to factor x squared plus 4x minus 5. I'm going to move this over in case it's not in your view anymore. So in this question again, my first step is to make my factor sum chart. So we're looking for factors of -5. Don't forget the negative. And those numbers need to add up to my B term, which is 4. Now sometimes it's difficult to think about numbers that multiply together to give you a negative number. So then just think about numbers that multiply to 5. So we don't have very many options here. I have 5 and 1. And then put your negative in. So if I put my negative beside the 5, because I know that a negative times a positive is a negative, and then I check, I have -5 plus 1, I can see that my answer is not the right sign. So then that tells me I need to switch the signs. Then it's the one that needs to be a negative. So 5 times -1 is -5, and now when I add 5 and -1 together, I get the +4, and that's the number that I want. So this is correct. That works. So therefore, R and S are 5 and -1. My next step, step 2, is I just write it down. So I know for my patterns I'm going to have an X over here, and then I'm going to write down +5. My second bracket is going to say X minus 1. So again, just draw your two brackets. You know it's going to be a binomial in each one. Put your X's down first, and then put your R and S values in. Sorry, I didn't realize that this was up on the screen. Let me remove it for you. Okay, the next question. We are going to factor a squared minus 10a plus 21. So again, my first step is to make my chart. And in my chart, I'm looking for factors of 21, which is C. Right, there's my C value, that's my B value. That sum or add up to -10. Don't forget those negatives. That's a common error. Students that forget to write the negatives. So let's try. So 21. Well, 7 times 3 is 21. And when I add 7 and 3 together, I get +10. Not the same sign. So don't forget that a negative times a negative is also positive. So if I multiply -7 times -3, that will also give me +21. And when I add -7 plus -3 together, this time I do get what I'm looking for, which is the -10. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take these numbers, the two values that we want. So that means, therefore, R and S are -7 and -3. And we're going to put them in the right positions. So again, I know that these first values are going to be an X, and then I'm going to write down -7 minus 3, and then it's done. If we go back and look at our three examples, there's some patterns that are always going to occur. So in the first example, when we have a positive B value, and a positive C value, in our brackets we always end up with two positive numbers for R and S. In this case, when we have, this could be a positive or a negative, but your C value is a negative, we will have a positive value in one bracket and a negative value in the other. Because when I expand and I multiply this term to this and this term together, which is what will eventually give me that C value, in order to get that negative, I need a positive in one bracket and a negative in the other. Or one of the numbers has to be positive and the other has to be negative. And in this case, when we have a negative B value and a positive C value, we always get two negatives in the brackets. And again, that's because if we were to expand out and multiply these two binomials together, to get my last term, I'd be multiplying -7 times -3. A negative times a negative is going to give you my positive value. So let's just summarize those patterns, which might help you come up with an answer more quickly at the bottom here. So when B and C are positive integers, like that first example, so we've got a positive and a positive here, you're going to have a number, and you're going to have, which will be your X. Maybe I'll write the X's here. Plus some number R, and there's going to be another positive here, plus another S value that's positive. If C is negative and B is either positive or negative, your pattern is going to look like this. You will have a plus in one bracket and a minus in the other, which would be the same as having a negative in the first bracket or a positive in the other. It doesn't actually matter. And in this case, if B was a negative value and C is a positive one, like the last example, we're going to have two negatives in our brackets. Okay? Just like the last example. This one. Now, I forgot to reinforce something with you. In all the examples, all three examples above, the order of the brackets is not important. So, for example, if you did x plus 4 times x plus 3, that is correct. If you did the x minus 1 first and the x plus 5, that would also be correct.